Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves.
There's this quote that's been bastardized several times, and it's from Winston Churchill. And the full quote is, "Many forms of government have been tried and will be tried in this world of sin and woe. No one pretends that democracy is perfect or all-wise. Indeed, it has been said that democracy is the worst form of government except for all the other forms that have been tried from time to time." And this quote usually gets chopped down to just, democracy is the worst form of government except for all of the other ones. And then along these same lines, I don't know if this is something, because it's something that's credited to Winston Churchill, but nobody can really prove that he made this quote. And it very well could be somebody taking his quote and then just changing a couple words to something that you can imagine Churchill saying, which is a similar thought process of, hey, capitalism is the worst form of financial system except for all the other ones, right? And so that quote I've seen many places online, many times used in memes or arguments or what have you. And it kind of goes back to this original Winston Churchill quote. But I'm bringing this up because democracy, the democratic republic that we have here in the United States, capitalism, they all kind of get intertwined when there's an argument about, left versus right or different systems or socialism versus capitalism or communism versus capitalism. And I hope I'm going to get in the next 10 or 20 minutes here all the way around to the point that I'm trying to make, that whether it's democracy, and again, reminder to those of us who dropped out of high school or didn't finish, 10th grade civics, we do not have a democracy in the truest sense. Like, we don't have a simple democracy here in America where there's just a majority rules democracy. If you get 50.01% of the vote, then everything works out exactly in the favor of those 50.01%. We have a democratic republic where we have the electoral college and we have senators and we have congressmen and women, and we have a slightly different system here. So not direct democracy, but I think the point is still well taken here, that right now a lot of what's being talked about on the news is the idea of inflation. And what is inflation? I promise you this will come full circle. What is inflation? Well, inflation, as defined by Thomas Sowell, who I think is an amazing economist, and if you've never read his very long book, Basic Economics, it's worth a read. It's kind of like an encyclopedia size. I think it's 700 or 800 pages, but buy the hardcover, read a couple chapters at a time. It's a really phenomenal book to understand the basics of economics and how the economy works, and especially how the economy works in America compared to other systems that have been tried. It's a phenomenal book. And he defines inflation as simply too many dollars, too much money, chasing too few goods, right? So if you just go back to our old economics 101, there's too much supply and not enough demand, prices go down. Well, when there's too much demand and there's not enough supply, prices go up because there's too much money or demand for a product chasing too few products. So then Apple or Ford or Walmart or whomever realizes, like, hey, there's too much money out there in the marketplace for whatever reason, chasing too few goods. That means we can raise the prices of the goods to do one of two things: either make more profit because there's so much demand out there based on the amount of goods in the system, or to slow down consumer demand so we can catch up. So depending on who you listen to right now, inflation might be the part of, or the blame of the inflation might be cast on the government, might be cast on companies, might be cast on whomever. And unfortunately, as usual, this is falling down political lines. So if you look at Twitter, which I don't even think I have a Twitter account, but once in a while I'll kind of just peruse the trending topics. If you look at memes that are being reposted on Instagram, if you look at arguments on Facebook, the general consensus among the right, conservatives, Republicans, most libertarians, is that one of the reasons we're experiencing inflation in America and worldwide, meaning prices for everything is going up, prices for labor, prices for housing, prices for consumer goods, durable goods, everything. The reason that inflation is going up, it's effectively the government's fault for two reasons. One is that the government has just printed, governments around the world have printed massive amounts of money. I don't exactly know how to fact check this, but several people who I trust in the economic world and the finance world have given me stats as high as 40 to 50% of all the US dollars currently in circulation were printed in about the last 2 years since we've been passing stimulus bill after stimulus bill, infrastructure after spending, both parties, by the way. Plenty of Republicans voting for this. We had a Republican president, obviously, for the first 16 months of COVID, somewhere around there. And then, now it's just doubled down and gotten worse. So I guess we only had a Republican president for the first 11, 12 months of COVID. And now we're about 11 or 12 months into a Democratic president. And they're both parties just spending money like drunken sailors, right? So you pump all this money into the economy and presumably, just Econ 101, more money, more demand. And it doesn't matter whether the government is spending that money or they're passing that on to consumers in the form of unemployment checks or stimulus checks. There's more money in the system now than there was an equilibrium of goods to service the money that wants to buy, the amount of goods that money wants to purchase. So you have that. And then you have the artificial wage problem, or the artificial high wage problem that I believe has been created by the government telling people who and who cannot work, right? So famously here in California, where I live for the time being, our governor came out and said, these jobs are essential. These jobs are non-essential. These are the people that can go to work. These are the people that cannot go to work. And now we put a whole swath of those people on unemployment, or we took their kids out of school. So now one of the parents has to stay home to stay with young children in order to do online schooling. Or we made it easy for people, not easy, we made it easier for people that weren't particularly interested in working in the first place, but had to for survival and to pay their bills. We made it easier for them to cobble together kind of this government program and this social safety net and this unemployment benefit, and they can get by for a certain amount of time, year, 2 years, 3 years, who knows how long. So the problem now is, in order to entice people to come back to work, companies, especially minimum wage jobs, service industry jobs, they've had to pay higher wages in order to entice people back into the workforce. So you have kind of these dual things at work where the government is pumping a ton of money into the economy. Now there's too much money chasing too few goods, so prices are going up, and they mess with the labor market, and now the whole thing is screwed up. That's kind of the standard conservative, libertarian talking point or thought process. On the left, what we're starting to see as a defense of inflation is like, well, this is just the normal, what they're calling transitory cycle of inflation, right? Markets go up, markets go down, things get more expensive, they get more cheap, they get cheaper, sorry, not more cheap, they get more expensive, then they get cheaper. And so the thought process from the left has been a couple things. One, these cost increases are just transitory, meaning they're going to come and then they're going to transit and they're going to go away. So yeah, the cost of gas went from averaging $3 up to $5, but the reality is that's kind of just transitory. Gas prices will eventually go down. Yeah, the cost of milk went from wherever you live, $5 a gallon to $7 a gallon, and the price of jeans went from $35 to $55 or whatever the case may be. But this is kind of just transitory, and we'll get back to normal after people return to work and the money supply kind of evens out, and there's not this big push for purchase of goods due to the pent-up demand during 2020 when everybody was kind of stuck at home, right? You can imagine a lot of people either with money or without money, with government money, with subsidies, with stimulus money. There wasn't a whole lot to spend it on in 2020, unless you were renovating your house or building a studio to work from home. There wasn't as much to spend it on because travel was diminished significantly, eating out, going to the movies. So much of the stuff was closed for so much of the country. And so the kind of current, I'll call it Democratic Party or liberal talking point is like, hey, this inflation is just transitory. Oh, and by the way, let's not kid ourselves that these companies, pick whatever big evil empire you want, whether it be Chevron or Ford or Walmart, they're just gouging consumers. They just want to make more money, so they're using this as an opportunity to gouge consumers. I don't see evidence to that, or, we're not seeing companies with massively expanded stock price or value. Well, we are seeing a huge run up in the stock market, actually. So I would have to look into that. I'm going to put a pin in that and get back to the companies that are really being vilified, like Walmart. I'm going to see what their market cap has gone. I know we've seen a huge boom in tech companies in the stock market, mostly because of the fact that everybody's working from home and using more tech. But, there's this argument developing of what's causing the inflation. And I think what we can look to is this idea that anytime a government tries central planning, it fails miserably. So this is why the Cold War ended with the USSR falling. This is why every time communism has been tried or aggressive forms of socialism have been tried, they failed. And the reason for that is that central planners, whether it's the, Russian government, or whether it's our Congress here in the United States, or whether it's the Argentinian or Venezuelan elected government parliament, central planners can never have their finger on the pulse of the market to the point where they can make all the decisions for the market, the consumers, the citizens, the spending, the production. Like, there's just not enough intelligence. There's not enough knowledge. There's not enough know-how in that central group of planners in order to plan a master economy. And I think that's what we're seeing, right? Is that there's always second and third level effects to the decisions that policymakers are making. So the government decides to shut down XYZ industry because it's not essential. The government decides to pump XYZ amount of money into the economy. Well, there's going to be a lot of second and third order effects. And I think the biggest thing that we're seeing from the hubris of these national governments across the world, thinking that they can plan everything and they can save everybody and they can do all of this and they can fund all of that. We're just seeing those negative effects through the cost of inflation. And there's a video that I'm going to play. It's only 2 minutes, so it's worth watching. It's Milton Friedman. And for those of you that don't know, Milton Friedman's arguably one of the greatest economists of all time. He talks about the power and the complexity of building a pencil. And I just want to watch this quick 2-minute video, and then we'll come back to my thought process here.
The basic principles underlying the free market, as Adam Smith taught them to his students in this university, are really very simple. Look at this lead pencil. There's not a single person in the world who could make this pencil. Remarkable statement? Not at all. The wood from which it's made, for all I know, comes from a tree that was cut down in the state of Washington. To cut down that tree, it took a saw. To make the saw, it took steel. To make the steel, it took iron ore. This black center, we call it lead, but it's really graphite, compressed graphite. I'm not sure where it comes from, but I think it comes from some mines in South America. This red top up here, the eraser, bit of rubber, probably comes from Malaya, where the rubber tree isn't even native. It was imported from South America by some businessmen with the help of the British government. This brass ferrule, I haven't the slightest idea where it came from, or the yellow paint, or the paint that made the black lines, or the glue that holds it together. Literally thousands of people cooperated to make this pencil. People who don't speak the same language, who practice different religions, who might hate one another if they ever met. When you go down to the store and buy this pencil, you are in effect trading a few minutes of your time for a few seconds of the time of all those thousands of people. What brought them together and induced them to cooperate to make this pencil? There was no commissar sending out orders from some central office. It was the magic of the price system, the impersonal operation of prices that brought them together and got them to cooperate to make this pencil so that you could have it for a trifling sum. That is why the operation of the free market is so essential, not only to promote productive efficiency, but even more, to foster harmony and peace among the peoples of the world.
So again, this is Milton Friedman talking about the complexity of what goes into a simple number 2 pencil. And what he mentioned there of the czars, this was filmed in the 70s, before the Iron Curtain fell and Russia was liberated effectively. What he was obviously referring to were the czars in Russia, where, again, in Thomas Sowell's books, Basic Economics, he would talk about this idea of central planning, where the central planners would tell the minions that in order to build these generators or these these generals, these coal operated generators, we have to paint them green before they go into production. And the factory would only have red paint left over. So they wouldn't paint them red because they were waiting for orders from on high, where in a capitalistic system, they'd be like, yeah, who cares? Green, red, whatever, just paint them, get them out there, turn them on, get the generators working to generate power, because the cities need power because it's almost winter and people are going to freeze to death. But instead, this waiting for orders from above before business could go forward means the generators would sit idle for months or years because they couldn't get the right chain of people reporting all the way up to the government to figure out if they were allowed to paint the generators green instead of red or red instead of green. And so when Milton Friedman talks about the complexity of just going into a number 2 pencil, you can start to conceptualize, well, if somebody messes with the graphite company that he explained, if somebody messes with the graphite company, it might take you a couple months, right? But if the government shuts down business in the area where the graphite is made, it might take you a couple months to get through the entire supply. But eventually, we're not going to have any number 2 pencils because there's no graphite to make the pencils to finish the product, right? And so then you can imagine a future 3 or 4 months later as all the number 2 pencils get run through. They're like, oh, now you want a number 2 pencil. Instead of paying a quarter, you're paying 35 cents or 50 cents or $1. And this is how market manipulation from a government standpoint starts to screw up the supply chain and cause inflation. Now, obviously, all of us use things significantly more complicated than a number 2 pencil. And the world, the global supply chain, the global economy we live in is so much more interconnected than when Milton Friedman gave that talk on the pencil, that you can imagine a small supply distribution issue in a province of China not being able to create the thing that goes into the microchip that gets shipped across the country to then be routed and wired into a Tesla that then allows a Tesla to be delivered, right? And cars are a great example of this. If you know anybody who's ordered a Tesla in the past, it used to be you order a Tesla, somewhere between 2 days and 2 weeks later, the Tesla dealership calls you and you go down and you pick up the exact car that you ordered. Now, those same Tesla orders, because of a shortage of microchips, is taking somewhere between 4 months and 8 months. I've got a buddy who ordered 2 Teslas, one for him and one for his wife, and he ordered them this summer. They were originally pushed back to September and then October and then November and then December, and now he's thinking about potentially taking delivery early in 2022, right? And for any of you that have been out shopping for a car, I've been looking for a new car for my wife for probably 6 months. And one of the things that we wanted, because we drive back and forth from LA to Vegas a lot, one of the things that we had to have was adaptive cruise control. So it's the cruise control where the sensors kind of know the car in front of you and it'll slow down, speed up, slow down. By the way, I don't care if you can afford a Honda Civic or you can afford a Rolls Royce, your next car has to have adaptive cruise control. It's amazing. It makes long drives so much less stressful and so much more comfortable to just put on the adaptive cruise control. You don't have to hit the gas or the brake and it just slow down, speed up. It's awesome. Well, the problem is when you make a car with adaptive cruise control, there's an array of additional sensors that go onto the car to make that happen. And so we've been looking for months and months and months, and we could not find a car that had that electronics package. So I've been asking the dealers at, Ford. Where else did we look? I think we even looked at a Buick. We looked at a Chevy Tahoe. And they're all saying, yeah, for that convenience package, there's just not enough chips in the marketplace. Good luck finding one. So we ended up finding a used car at CarMax that had it because somebody had turned it in, and we were able to get that. The one new car that we did find was we found a Kia dealership in Glendale, California, and a Kia dealership in Henderson, Nevada. They both had one Telluride SUV, which is a kind of middling B+ SUV. It's nothing super exotic, but it's nice. It's probably in the $45,000 range. And to buy a Kia, which is not exactly the hottest name brand in cars, if you wanted all the electronics packages, they were starting the negotiation at somewhere between $5,000 and $10,000 above sticker price. So if you think about this, you used to be able to walk into a Kia dealership, and get a great deal on a car, maybe a couple $1,000s below invoice, right? And now they're starting the conversation at between $5,000 and $10,000 above the sticker price because, again, back to the economics 101, too much demand not enough supply because the supply chain has been messed with. Think of the pencil and these chips that are coming from China, and then battery components that are coming from Africa. You mess with the global supply chain, and this is what happens. And this stuff has real ramifications because, okay, great. Scott and his wife can't buy a new car. Woe is me, right? Wah. But when I was at the Kia dealership, I was talking to the salesman, and I was like, hey, man, like, what's the story? I just can't bring myself. It's against my ethos to overpay for a car. Like, I pride myself on negotiating for a good deal on cars. What's the deal? And he's like, well, at this dealership, ironically, I had almost the same exact conversation in Glendale and in Henderson. At this dealership, we usually stock about 200 to 300 cars. Currently, we have 18 on the lot. And again, woe is me. I can't buy a new car, whatever. But I said to the car guy, I was like, hey, man, like, are you at least getting the extra $5,000 when you do sell one of these cars? Because I have to imagine this sucks for you, right? The guy who's working at the car dealership. And he's like, yeah, man. He's like, I'm going broke. I'm applying for other jobs. And that $5,000 doesn't go to me because the overhead of this building, the overhead of having to have a receptionist, the overhead of having to keep the lights on, you know, when we used to make $1,000 a car, but we were selling 200 a month, and now we're selling 20 a month, you know, we got to make 5,000 a car just to keep the lights on. He's like, they spiffed me an extra, I think it was $300 at one and $500 at the other, out of that markup, but it's not enough to make up for the volume that I used to sell as a car salesman. And so, you know, I talked about this on the podcast, and I wish I knew what episode it was because I would go back and reference it. When especially the state of California started picking, well, what jobs are essential and what jobs are non-essential? It's like the hubris, the ignorance. And I immediately thought of this iPencil clip with Milton Friedman because I'm like, okay, so let's do this thought experiment. Food's obviously essential. So grocery store workers can go to the grocery store. But guess where the chicken breast comes from? Well, it comes from a farm probably halfway across the country. Okay, well, then those farmers are essential, right? Well, yeah, but those cars got to come on or that chicken has to come on a truck from halfway across the country. All right, so the truck driver is essential. All right, but I don't know if you've ever driven on the freeways in LA or anywhere across country. There's blown out semi tires everywhere. If you drive a lot like I do, you've probably seen a semi blow out a tire on a freeway, right? A lot of tires, a lot of weight on the tires, a lot of wear and tear on the tires. They blow out. Food cannot get from point A to point B in the truck if the truck doesn't have tires. So now the guy who installs tires, that guy's pretty freaking essential. All right, well, what about the guy who works at the rubber factory where they make the tires? If we don't have tires to put on the truck to get the chicken to the store, then we don't have chicken at the store, which is pretty essential for people to be able to eat, right? So you can see how this goes all the way down the path to where every job in America is essential, right? Everything is essential. And I've brought this up before, and I don't use any identifying information or their names or anything like that. But during COVID, I had 3 friends who committed suicide. And little did I know that those people were frequently or historically dealing with mental health issues, but they had found a way to work with it. You know, one was probably strong involvement in the church. One was really strong involvement in a CrossFit community and kind of the gym that this person belonged to. And another one, as odd as it sounds, they just loved going to their kind of menial job, right? Which many of us would consider low paying or minimum wage or menial. Take away all those things, close down the churches, close down the CrossFit gyms, close down this person's job because it wasn't deemed essential. Well, guess what? It was pretty fucking essential to them to keep their mental health going so that they didn't off themselves. And so, you know, I bring this all up because both Republicans and Democrats in their own way have this thought of like, well, we can save you if we just do things our way. If we're just the group that's in power and allowed to put out the master plan, then we'll be able to solve all your problems. And it's like, no, you won't. The market is too complex. The supply chain is too complex. The economy, the free market, the system that we've built in America and tried to expand to much of the world, it's too complex. The couple thousand of you that are in Congress, in the White House, the deep staters, meaning all the staffers that work for these people, you guys aren't that fucking smart. Like, you can't make all the decisions for the national and world economy. And Gavin Newsom, you sure as heck can't make all the decisions for the state of California, which is about the 10th largest economy in the entire country, and think it's all going to be okay. And I've had this article up by Wired the whole time I've been talking, because it talks about this idea of the chip shortage, right? The chip shortage drags on and on. So in between you and I, you, the person watching this, and me, the person recording this, within this microphone, within the soundboard that we have recording the sound, within the computers that we're going to edit this on, within the servers we're going to upload this to at Facebook and Amazon and wherever else we disseminate this, to the cell phone towers that get the signal out that allows you to watch this on your computer or your phone. All the microchips and semiconductors that go into just getting this silly little podcast from point A to point B, there's probably, I would guess there's millions of semiconductors and microchips involved in the production, distribution, transferability, I think I might have made that word up, and the consumption on your side electronically, right? So what do? You put the whole world economy basically on pause for anywhere from 6 months to 2 years, depending on what country or state you're in. And no shit, we're going to have a shortage of these semiconductors, right? And we're going to have a shortage of these microchips. And we're going to reference this, both this Milton Friedman video and also this article from Wired, because it talks about, hey, you mess up the supply chain, right? And on top of messing up the supply chain, you skyrocket demand, because remember, going back to the definition of inflation, too much money chasing too few goods. Well, guess what? You had pent up demand from people that were stuck at home that wanted to spend some of this money. You got the American government and many other governments just pumping trillions of dollars into the system, a lot of which goes to buy goods that have semiconductors and microchips in them. And then you have a huge upswing of people that are working digitally from their home, right? So you got to get upgraded routers for your internet. Maybe you bought a new home computer because you're working more from home. Maybe you bought a new monitor because you don't have the fancy monitor you used to have at your office, right? So huge upswing in demand, huge influx of cash, huge shortage of consumer chips. And this article does a really good job of detailing, like, this is going to be an ongoing problem for a couple years, because it takes up to 2 years and hundreds of millions of dollars to build new semiconductor plants. So we've got a real problem. And circling all the way back around of that left versus right argument, the fact that certain news media outlets are trying to explain to people or argue to people that this is going to be just transitory inflation. Like, don't worry about it. Prices are up a little bit, but they'll go back down. I think it's malarkey. I think it's bullshit. I think the increased wages, the increased cost of housing, the increased cost of cars, the lack of electronics, which means the electronics that are entering the market are getting more expensive. I think it's going to be an ongoing problem for a long time. And I've mentioned this before. The Morning Brew is one of the daily newsletters that I get by email that just has great content every day. A little bit of politics, a little bit of technology, and surprise, price is raised. This came out November 10th, so it's about a month old. We're filming this in December 2021. Prices rise at their fastest pace in more than 30 years, putting more pressure on the Federal Reserve to do something. And I want you to think about this for the people that are in minimum wage, low wage, service industry jobs. Not only did you put them out of work for a year, some places longer, and mess with their ability to earn money, and then told them it's going to be okay because the government will send you a $600 check a couple times throughout the year. So not only did you put pressure on their income side of the balance sheet, now because of inflation, you're putting a lot of pressure on their debt side of the balance sheet, their cash flow side of the balance sheet, meaning how much stuff costs. And then everybody's going to be surprised when the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. No, it's not a surprise. It's the hubris of governments and this idea that they think that they can do central planning and that everything will be okay. It won't be okay. Let the market do its thing. Everybody in America should know how to deal with the current pandemic and their current individual health choices and health concerns. Let the market get back to the market. Stop any type of lockdowns. Stop any type of interference with what the market is doing, and stop just printing money for the sake of printing money.